I would like to thank the Attorney General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, who announced earlier today that OFAC license for Dragon project, which would benefit the Gas National Company of the Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela for joint exploitation and development of our Caribbean gas resources. This was probably the easy part, as this OFAC license was already approved by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The terms of this license, however, are confidential. There is no way to know if those confidential terms will be acceptable to Venezuela. Venezuelan PDVSA officials are knowledgeable on confidential terms on existing Chevron license, which is also confidential. It remains to be seen whether, once Trinidad and Tobago authorities meet with Venezuela authorities and disclose those confidential terms, if such terms will be feasible for Venezuela. However, in Venezuela, main news is not the granting of OFAC license. The good news is that Venezuela and Cuba are getting Oreshnik missiles to defend ourselves from United States aggression, and probably from either Venezuela or Cuba, we will be able to launch missiles to United States territory as a deterrent for hostile attacks. Meanwhile, Trinidad and Tobago is conducting military exercises with the United States. Prime Minister Kamla Persad has guaranteed that no United States invasion into Venezuela will come out of Trinidad and Tobago. The only use of such military would be if Venezuela occupies Guyana. And as we have spoken earlier, such scenario is out of the question, as our main goal is defensive. Now, the question is, let's suppose Kamla Persad is genuinely interested in gaining peace with Venezuela and mutual economic development, but granting these powers to United States officials to conduct military exercises in Trinidad and Tobago, and if an attack were to be launched into Venezuela from Puerto Rico, would military assets of the United States inside Trinidad and Tobago, would they also enter Venezuelan territory? Venezuela has repeated many times that we seek peace with the United States, and we even have helped that country in terrorist attacks that were about to bomb the United States Embassy in Caracas, and Venezuelan authorities averted escalation and averted war. Venezuela is receiving Russian missiles for our defense, and theoretically we could launch those missiles into the continental United States if the United States attacked Venezuela from either Puerto Rico or a ship in the Caribbean. But Venezuela is strongly committed to a no-strike first policy, and we are not sure that Trinidad and Tobago will be able to comply with that as well. I trust Kamla Persad Besesar's government in extending an olive branch. I still think she needs to come to Venezuela and have a state visit with Maduro and have a photo opportunity with the flags of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago, with both of them in a joint press conference. I believe all this diplomatic standard visual arrangement is needed. Otherwise, it is quite unlikely for Dragon gas deal to proceed. The Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, during the press conference, was extremely cautious and limited in what he could say, as he cannot speak on behalf of Marco Rubio, he cannot speak on behalf of OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control of the United States. And he can't speak on behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago Foreign Ministry, which at this time has not been able to initiate conversations with Nicolás Maduro government. 6 days ago, I went to PDVSA with a letter expressing my support for the Dragon gas deal. My support remains, but now I am concerned on United States' increased military presence in Trinidad. I do not believe the Dragon deal can go through if United States continues escalating, while the rest of the Caribbean countries, including Barbados, have explicitly asked for de-escalation of the military conflict, meaning that both United States and Venezuela should not continue deploying additional armed forces in the Caribbean. However, Trinidad and Tobago is conducting military exercises with the United States on Trinidad and Tobago territorial waters, which I assume would immediately disqualify approval of Dragon gas deal. Regular citizens are usually deprived of this kind of information. I was rejected by PDVSA. I was rejected by the Embassy of Trinidad and Tobago. However, I made an approach to the Embassy of Barbados, which seems promising, because at least the ambassador of Barbados is interested in learning my point of view. Hopefully, I will be able to meet him soon. I have explained to the ambassador of Barbados that the absence of Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba in forthcoming Summit of the Americas is not conducive to dialogue and agreements. I also suggested that the participation of the Barbados National Gas Company, not only in Dragon, but perhaps in Rio Caribe, Mejillones, Patao, Cocuina, Lorán, Dorado, Plataforma del Tana 3 or Plataforma del Tana 5 provides an ample amount of gas that could be exploited by blocks through different Caribbean companies, including the Barbados National Gas Company. And of course, there are cultural exchanges regarding language and music and arts programs that embassies across the world usually conduct with the countries where they are established as a low-risk activity. Barbados and Venezuela share gas fields whose produce is bound for Trinidad and Tobago liquefied natural gas facilities. It would be interesting if the Barbados National Gas Company could form a joint agreement with PDVSA of Venezuela for exploration of any Plataforma del Tana, Mariscal Sucre, or Orinoco Belt fields. Venezuela has so much oil and gas that our best bet is to allocate different blocks to different countries and different companies so that we don't have a monopoly of any single producer dominating the market. Chevron's participation, however, seems declining as a percentage of total Venezuelan oil and gas production, as stringent terms in OFAC license of Chevron does not permit either Chevron or Venezuela to operate at a profit. And whatever little output is being extracted by Chevron and commercialized through the confidential license is set for both Chevron and PDVSA as a strategic, almost non-commercial operation limited to a small amount, while the big chunk of Venezuelan petroleum and gas exploration goes to China, India, and Malaysia. Vice President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, once provided the challenge that we must restore our relations with Latin American and Caribbean countries. Many of these shows are meant to promote that Caribbean and Latin American unity. The OFAC license just awarded to Trinidad and Tobago National Gas Company is set to be valid for a period of 6 months. During these 6 months, Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados should organize trilateral meetings with the respective national oil and gas companies, their presidents, and their foreign ministers. Clearly, our geographic contiguity is an asset for Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela. Clearly, we all need to become important producers for the Caribbean market. And politically, Barbados is in a neutral position regarding the strong United States alignment of Trinidad and Tobago versus the strong Russia alignment of Venezuela. And perhaps the approach of Barbados is the most suitable for peace. We must remember that Prime Minister Mia of Barbados warned that escalation of militaries, both Venezuelan and United States, is not a desirable outcome for the Caribbean Sea. Venezuela and United States will need to dialogue. Perhaps the United States is offering this 6-month opportunity so that the authorities of Trinidad and Tobago, with the license, can engage Venezuelan authorities. However, the Venezuelan petroleum belongs to the Venezuelan people, and I am part of the Venezuelan people. The reason why the Venezuelan oil industry is public and not private allows regular citizens such as myself to speak on behalf of the oil that lies below the soil of my country, as if part of that oil were mine. Therefore, I would like to invite the National Gas Company of Barbados to assist the National Oil Company of Trinidad and Tobago and PDVSA so that we figure out a Caribbean proposal for peace and petroleum extraction and distribution. I went through the OFAC page, and It is restricting licenses and sanctioning a lot of people from Iran lately, and Hamas, and Hezbollah, and the Venezuelans have been sanctioned long ago. Looking to the future, I am not convinced that this overuse of sanctions is going to do any good. Iran just informed that they just found an incredible gas reserve, and they will probably develop it with or without OFAC licenses. Venezuela's gas fields, along with those of Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, are also massive, and the question now turns whether we should seek to develop them in a Caribbean way, counting with OFAC licenses from the United States, or if Venezuela will just leave those fields untouched, which for me is the worst idea possible, because we should take advantage of our resources. Political propaganda always claims that Venezuela has the most abundant gas and oil reserves of the world, but if we don't exploit them, we continue in poverty and we continue in lack of job opportunities. We really should develop our gas reserves. Perhaps Venezuela would like Russian or Chinese companies to develop them, but it looks like China is already well positioned in Venezuelan oil industry, and Russia does not seem interested in investing a lot in Venezuelan oil industry. The emphasis of Russia during the Cold War, when they were partners with Cuba, was mostly political and military, and so is recent support of Russia with Venezuela, political and military. To this date, we see no significant increase of Russian businesses. However, Venezuela, because of OFAC sanctions, will not receive any United States investment either. Therefore, Venezuela needs Caribbean investment. ALBA was supposed to be an avenue for Venezuela to provide petroleum through Petrocaribe to various Caribbean islands. Now we need the opposite side of investment. We need Caribbean countries such as Trinidad and Tobago or Barbados to invest resources in Venezuelan businesses, both upstream petroleum and gas and downstream secondary businesses and even tertiary services such as English classes for Venezuelans in Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago or Guyana, or Spanish classes to various peoples of the Caribbean. Supermarkets might benefit from exports and imports of agro-industrial products. Venezuela agro-industrial capacity has increased, and the Caribbean countries have lots of interesting recipes, many with explicit African and Hindu heritage, which will always be welcome to always curious Venezuelan consumers who like to experiment the best delicacies of the planet. Perhaps Barbados will be able to devise a strategy for defense of the Caribbean, taking advantage of United States assets in Trinidad and Tobago, along with Chinese, Russian, and Iranian assets in Venezuela, And little by little, we start exchanging military information, and the Caribbean becomes an effective zone of peace through strength. However, that would require containment of Iranian, Chinese, Russian, and United States bases in Caribbean countries. At this time, neither Venezuela nor Trinidad and Tobago are in a position of containing Russia, China, Iran, or the United States, as we are willingly seeking military investment for defense of our intra-Caribbean borders. CARICOM has not yet gotten to the realization that the border should be the border of the Caribbean Sea, not the individual borders of Caribbean countries which share the Caribbean Sea. We must develop a Caribbean sphere of influence, which sounds extremely difficult as some Caribbean countries are in ALBA, other Caribbean countries are not in ALBA, and as we will soon see in the Summit of the Americas in the Dominican Republic, there will be a huge fight, ALBA versus non-ALBA, as some countries prefer United States military interference, while other countries prefer not to count on that United States military interference. In the 6-month window period available for taking advantage of the OFAC license, Venezuela should seek to explain our partners in ALBA that investment in our Paria Mariscal Sucre and Plataforma del Tana gas fields is desirable for greater supplies of gas to the Caribbean. It is nice to hear people from Grenada or St. Vincent and the Grenadines cheerfully supporting Venezuela on the military issue, and that support is appreciated, as indeed we would prefer not to be invaded by the United States. And we would prefer Trinidad and Tobago to de-escalate political tensions with Venezuela so that the Dragon gas deal proceeds. However, if the Dragon gas deal does not proceed, Venezuelan output of gas and oil will continue being insufficient. Venezuela really needs to increase our output. Iran is seeking to increase its output. Russia is seeking to increase its output. And we have no Vietnam, Russia, India, China offers for developing Dragon gas field. Shell, major oil company, currently has no interests in Venezuela, and it would enter the country with the Dragon gas deal. We are not in the situation of prohibiting investment from anyone. However, Venezuela needs good terms. And it looks, according to what happened with Chevron license, that the terms were not attractive for either Chevron or Venezuela as we continue our relationship, but with significantly decreased output. It looks like we need a better agreement with Trinidad and Tobago according the terms of new OFAC license for developing the Dragon gas deal. Russia and Iran are constantly in conversations with OFAC and the United States for improving their terms of trade. We should go away from the politically explosive propaganda that we should do everything outside of the United States unless we were able to do it. It seems that BRICS will eventually do it. However, Russia and the United States go to war and simultaneously they discuss OFAC deals. I would like to thank again the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago along with the government of the Sister Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and I also thank the Barbados ambassador in Caracas, Venezuela, for willing to listen to what I have to say. During the next 6 months, it will be our task to ensure that the Dragon Gas deal succeeds for the benefit of Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela.